thank you all for coming, and thank you so much, Minnie, for being here. As I wrote in the Times the other day, I've always felt like we would be really good friends. I remember, I'm sure you have also been waiting for this for 20 years, but like Benny and Skylar, I just felt so connected to them back in the 90s, and I really also kind of thought about us walking around Notting Hill, so it's kind of very, it's a bit of a moment for me. But obviously we're not actually here to talk about our friendship, so maybe we'll do that after. But anyhow, it's been 139 days since the New York Times published its first story about Harvey Weinstein that we just saw. And actually, I'm really proud to say that just a couple of hours ago, we and the New Yorker were awarded the Polk Award, which is one of the major awards in journalism for this coverage, yeah. And the New York Times also won with the Washington Post for coverage of Trump in the Kremlin, and Gail Collins won. Anyway, it's a good day for the New York Times. But anyway, it's been about 139 days since then, and it's been more like 500 since the Access Hollywood tape came out in 2016. And I just wanted to ask you, I mean, everybody's experienced this Me Too moment differently. And so I just want to start by asking you what has surprised you the most, what has inspired you, what's disappointed you, as how this is playing out across society. What are the particulars that really hooked you and,
Well, I think the first thing, it was very interesting when that Tarana Burke, until, it took a minute for people to realize that she was actually the genesis of the Me Too movement. I believe she was a teacher or a counselor, and she was counseling a student, or had been encouraging a student to open up about what had been going on, and they'd expressed this terrible story of sexual violence, and she couldn't deal with that, and suddenly realized that she couldn't deal with the sexual violence that had happened to her, and she coined the phrase Me Too. And this was in 2006. So it took a minute that I understand how there was nothing nefarious in anybody using that hashtag, but we have to realize that this has layers. I understand that the beautiful ciphers in Hollywood, and the arch evil, powerful mogul, and the beautiful blondes and brunettes and redheads, and it's all super clickbaity and glamorous and amazing on one level, and it's very media friendly. But the story goes back. It goes back as far as women can remember, and hopefully it will go forward in a way that isn't just sensational. That is not, I don't want it to, when I first started seeing this, it was so extraordinary how it gathered like a snowball of women's voices. And a lot of them are women that I know, and that was shocking, and some I'd known about before. But I've quite quickly, along with, I think, a lot of other women, felt, how does this not just be the sort of carpet bomb, the explosion, the dust settles, and then everybody goes back to normal? How does this actually have legs to walk out of this sensationalism into something that is meaningful, and into something that gives voice to women that aren't amplifiers like, a celebrity is, which is really, I said that to you the other day, but that's really what, I'm a straight white amplifier. That's I am just another actress who works in Hollywood, speaking about the Me Too movement. I am a survivor of sexual assault. But I think what qualifies me more than any of those is that I'm a human being, and in all of this polarization, this has got lost. This whole men writing about women, how angry they are, and men writing about the paralysis that men now feel and they can't do anything, and women being angry with men, and it doesn't move forward if we remain this polarized, to me. And that became, in this extraordinary uprising of women, which I hope continues, of women vocalizing their stories and what has happened to them. I really hope that men will be able to add their voices to that, not as survivors of sexual assault, but as people who walk next to us and, who are unafraid to interact, because this movement feels scary to a lot of men that I've talked to.
Right. And
that's a long answer.
That's a good answer.
Sorry.
We're just getting started. So you mentioned you were a survivor of sexual assault, and you spoke out about that before Harvey Weinstein, back after the Access Hollywood tape. You talked about
Yeah.
being 17 and at a Greek
Yeah.
resort and
Yeah.
someone hit on you and then actually hit you and you
Yeah.
refused to dance with him. And you said that every girl I know had been assaulted, right?
Every girl I know at some point has had a hand put somewhere unwanted or has consented to sex because they thought they had to, or which is not assault, by the way, but is to do with women not having a clear voice around sex and sexual interaction. I don't think, or certainly when I was young, I didn't. But it's so funny. I watched the tape. I talked about this assault for the first time on this like really mad, amazing show. It's called Watch What Happens Live, and it starts taping live at midnight with this amazing guy, Andy Cohen. And it's, you know, they have you drinking, and it's super light and breezy and fun, and everyone's talking about it's fun. And suddenly he started talking about the tape and the thing, and it really, the fact that Trump had got away with this admission, I felt like I needed to speak up, even in that strange moment, to somehow speak back to that these assaults happen. And
but you hadn't planned it. You hadn't gone
not
on the
at all.
show to make this
hadn't done
big
a
coming out
pre-interview.
about.
Not even slightly. It was in response to also watching, you know, it was right in the middle of the primaries and watching him stalk Hillary Clinton around the stage like the creepiest stalker ever. It was all just so weird and strange, and that all of this stuff was coming up. And my boyfriend made a really interesting point yesterday or the day before, where he said what's so interesting is that people are coming up now with, particularly in the Me Too movement, these moral stories, these ethical stories and these ideas, and they're getting pounded for it. They're getting pounded. And yet the immorality that the current administration in America and Trump himself perpetuate seems to go utterly unchecked, and he exists with impunity so far. But I do pray to Robert Mueller every day. I don't pray to God, I pray to Robert Mueller, who I do believe bears more than a passing resemblance to Sam the Eagle. I love him. Anyway, I'm sorry, I digress, but...
You said you didn't plan to speak out then, and you referred to yourself as an amplifier. But so then a year later, you speak out again after the Weinstein story, and you talk. You know, Matt Damon has made his comments about not conflating different kinds of bad behavior. You speak out first on Twitter, and then you do an interview with The Guardian. You said he was utterly tone deaf and part of the problem. And you got quite a big backlash for this. Bret Stephens in the New York Times came after you. Bill Maher said it's not Me Tooism, it's Me Carthyism. And in the time since then, there's been, I think, quite a bit more debate over this question of conflating different behaviors. You just spoke about consent versus, you know, all the different kinds of bad behaviors. And
well, hold on, can I just go back to just because it's too long and we need to just deal with this in bits. So what was interesting about Matt Damon, which was not interesting to the media but was very interesting to me, was not that he was an ex-boyfriend or that I had any sort of beef with him, because God knows I really don't. Like, I haven't seen him in 20 years. But he represented every intelligent, you know, nice, white, male who feels it is their job to comment on the way that women metabolize stuff. And what he happened to be talking about in this instance was how women should metabolize abuse, that we should somehow have a hierarchical system whereby, you know, a touch on the arse is this, the tits is this, you know, front bottom, back bottom, over the shirt, rape. You know, that there would be some kind of criteria. Also, he was only talking about how men should be dealt with, which, of course, there should be due process. Of course, there is a judiciary that is in charge of doing that. But when I said that men needed to listen, it was that they needed to listen to the women speak about their assault without being prescribed. And what Bret Stephens boy, did you read what he wrote about Woody Allen recently? I'm sure you did. You should all go and Google that. It was astonishing. What he said, he used the kids use the hashtag STFU, shut the fuck up, which is what he said I said. I didn't say that at all. I said the time now was for men to listen. I never said anything about staying silent ad infinitum. There is, as I said at the beginning, there is no way this moves forward unless we do this together. Bill Maher talking about McCarthyism. I mean, it's so polemic and it's so TV. It's so not what this is about. When I think about this movement, not telling people to be quiet, think about the model of truth and reconciliation. Think about that. Use that as the model. Women, people, you get to speak out. You get to be heard. You get to be seen and heard. And people get, the accusers get to hear that. They get to metabolize that. And then there is due process, and then there is healing. And they didn't move on. They moved on as a nation. They moved on as people integrated together. Men and women within this movement need to move on together. We need to find a way of reaching across the aisle, of stopping this paralysis, and of having conversations to make men feel safe about having an opinion and not attacking like Bret Stephens does, or commenting, with apparent authority like a lot of other men do.
When we spoke on the phone last week, we talk on the phone a lot because
we're friends.
Friends. Yeah. Anyway, but you said something so interesting I hadn't heard anybody else say. You said that you described Me Too as an insurgency.
Yes.
And said that then this backlash was focused on the insurgents instead of what they were rebelling against.
Well, that is actually what's happening. If you look at this kind of this system, I don't like using the word patriarchy. It's so patriarchal. This system that has been in place that we are all aware of, especially if you is a woman, this thing, when women rose up, it was treated as an insurgency, and consequently, what I've noticed happens with insurgencies is pretty soon people start looking at what's wrong with the insurgency, and they start talking about that, and that becomes the conversation, as opposed to looking back at all the infractions of the system that it's insurging against. So that happened very quickly, and I was like, hang on, it's been literally since October that we've been talking about this, and already tons of journalists are having this massive eye roll about women speaking up and men getting caught in the crosshairs because there are all these accusers that are falsely accusing men. And suddenly I started to hear that it was about this. And I was like, wait, well, I is so way off the ball of, in any system, in any insurgency, there's going to be some bad shit. There's going to be some bad stuff that happens. That doesn't mean that you get rid of the whole system. People call 911 in America asking where their fucking pizza is. Like, people abuse stuff, but that doesn't mean that you get rid of the whole thing. It means that you acknowledge that, you have due process around accusations, and you carry on. And you carry on creating a space that is wide enough for women of all colors, creeds, denominations, socially, economically, gender, whatever, that they are heard.
So it happened again last week. You got some shit because you were the first celebrity to speak out about Oxfam. You resigned, or the first one to resign. You've been working with this charity for 20 years.
I've
you were
been
an
an ambassador for 20 years for them.
And you stepped down kind of the first allegations that came out, and I think some people think it was a rush to judgment. So why did you speak out so quickly? How do you make the decision of when to speak out, how to speak out?
Do you know what? I haven't, apart from with like my mum and my dad and my family, I haven't been in a 20-year relationship with anyone. Like, they're the longest relationship I've been in my life was with Oxfam. Like, I started raising money for them, doing sponsored swims when I was 9 years old, and that was just like, that was when I wasn't on the dock. I've been a part of creating programs, I've been part of programs. It broke my heart in more ways. Like, this makes me want to start crying now, because here's the thing. There'd been a lot of talk about this going on. I'd heard rumors about things, I'd asked questions, I'd been assured that there was nothing going on. The primary programs that I have been involved with Oxfam are to do with women who have to work as sex workers to supplement their income because the factories that they're working in, their eyes have gone by the time they're 24 and they have to become sex workers. They need retraining and help to not have to do that. Getting young girls who've been told that the only thing they can do in their life is prostitution in Cambodia, in Laos, in Thailand. It cut me to the very heart of what I've been involved with. And for me, this whole you're damned, I was damned if I did, I was damned if I didn't leave Oxfam, I needed to send a very clear message not to the beautiful people that I've worked with on the ground for so many years, who are amazing and industrious, but to the corporation that knew, the corporate people who knew this was going on, who hushed it, who were not transparent about it, either with me or the people that work for them, and who didn't do anything about it, only when it was called upon. And I know people say, well, it's interesting it's been called upon now and that they want to defund the charities. They need to clean house. They need to clean house. And if me standing up and going, I'm not part of this, clean your house up, I'll come back, I'll do anything. But I won't carry on being associated, and I don't feel the women who I've worked for, I will carry on working for. I will find a way. There are many, many social enterprises available where I know that there is not a nefarious abuse of power going on. So, people can say what they want. Thank you.
Thank you.
What you gonna do?
So, I want to go back to the sort of the beginning, or the end of the beginning or something, but to Harvey Weinstein, who of course you worked with.
Yeah.
But you were not in these stories. You were not sexually harassed by Weinstein.
I had a different story, which I talked about a few years before. I feel like it was on Ellen or it was on something, but I talked about it. He didn't want to cast me because he said to my face and to the casting director, to Ben, to Matt, to Chris Moore, who was the actual producer of the movie, like on the set, and to Gus Van Sant, that, and I quote, I was not fuckable. That was my worth. And I remember him taking me aside and he was going, you know, I'm doing you a huge favor saying this to you, because you need to go for parts where that is not going to be a problem. It's going to be a problem. You're not going to be a leading actress. You're going to have to go. And I remember thinking, first of all, like wanting to cry, because, you know, every girl wants to think that, like, she's attractive. But then I started thinking, then I was like looking at this dude and I was going, what, he's the great arbiter of, like, who's fuckable? Like, this motherfucker? No. No. So even at like 23 or 4, I was terrified of him. I was terrified that he was right, but these men banded around me, Matt and Ben and Chris Moore and Gus Van Sant, and said, we're making the film with this girl. But that stayed with me, and it was so funny. A few girls called me up when everything was coming up about sexual assault, a few actresses. They were like, it's quite weird, like, you're the only one who said he wouldn't fuck. How do you feel about that? And I was like, I'm actually feeling pretty good right now. Like, to tell you the God's honest truth, like, it's all right. Like, it's okay that I'm not part of the gang.
Well, I was wondering if you, had any jealousy or anything.
That's so.
No.
But no, I think also.
But you did not have a good relationship with him, working with. I mean, he was not nice to you.
He was not. He didn't want me there. I think I feel like it was Mira Sorvino, Ashley Judd came out recently and said in this whole, they were saying how they'd been blacklisted, and they said that he'd called them and said he wanted to give them the part of, my part in Good Will Hunting, but, whatever. That's just business. I got off lightly with him. I really did.
What about the broader question, though, of how male power plays itself out in Hollywood and sexual harassment in Hollywood?
Here's the thing. So when we talk about sexual harassment, it's not about sex, it's about power. That, first and foremost, to me, it is, and to loads of women. I spoke to so many people before doing this, and it comes up so often in conversation with men and women. It's about power. It's about the codified behavior between men and women, and whether that is learned. Harvey Weinstein's big defense initially, I don't know if you remember, was that, this is just how I was raised. I come from this generation that did that. That's just what happened. I talked to my mom and my aunt and my older friends, the older generation, well, that's just what you had to put up with. You just had to put up with that. And if you complained about it, you lost your job, or you wouldn't get the job, and you just had to get on with it. I don't accept that. We are people. We are people first and foremost. We're human beings, and we know the difference. This idea of I don't know what the line is to cross. You know the line. Yeah. We know the line. It's just that we've all sanctioned that particular kind of male power by women not feeling that they are able to speak up, not being confident to speak up, by men wanting to do what they want to do, and then being horrified when someone says, you might need to change your behavior, or you might just need to examine what kind of the codifying of your language. I said to my sister, and I said, literally 2 nights ago, sorry for saying literally, but you're all young, you understand. This really lovely man who is a powerful producer, and I really like him. And he saw me, I hadn't seen him in a while, and the first thing he said to me was not, hello, how are you? The first thing he said to me was, God, you're a bit militant right now, aren't you? And I felt this familiar donkey kick of, you know, and I laughed. I didn't say, why'd you say that? Like, what does that mean? And what does that mean to you? And what does that mean about a woman being militant? And why is me speaking out? Why is that militant? Or is why me taking a position militant, which has all these aggressive male connotations. So
and you never call a male militant. Nobody would ever say, why is a man being militant?
But it was the same thing, and I wanted to ask you about this because you're a journalist. The Telegraph the other day called me outspoken, and I realized that, you know, you invert that and it's speaking out, which has this great positive connotation and is neutral in a way. But outspoken is not. Outspoken is uppity, female, getting above her standing, speaking above where she is supposed to be. It's this super passive-aggressive, but utterly germane to like men commenting on women. And it really pissed me off. It was like, what is outspoken but speaking up? And we have to do that. We don't do that to be aggressive or to make people afraid. We do that in order that we can start a conversation, not to shut anyone down, but to begin something. It's not an ending, it's a beginning. So
you mentioned your mom, and she's here tonight, which is great, and because you've come home to celebrate her birthday, which I think is great. And I know you talked a little bit about the differences in how you, maybe the generations see Me Too, but I really want to ask you about how you got to be a person who speaks out, or how you got to be a feminist, or you know, kind of what you think in your own upbringing, in your background. You have an older sister. What's the origin, do you think, of this activism and the speaking out?
Well, I do think it comes from the women in my family. I come from a very long line of, my mother has 3 sisters, my sister.
They're all uppity.
Well, I mean, I suppose. But it's always been, you know, my mum always used to, in her, I hope you don't mind, Mum, she would always say, oh, I've got such a big mouth. Like she'd always, but really what she was doing was having an opinion about things. But there was always this disclaimer, I've got a big mouth. And I caught it from her because it always seemed that if you had a thought about something and you could articulate it and you were interested in talking about it, then you shouldn't be stopped from doing that. And you certainly shouldn't be punished. And I must say, I feel like I've been punished a lot for speaking out, but mostly because it doesn't play into the kind of gentle idea of, you know, a grateful movie star, which is maybe what I sort of began as.
How have you been punished?
I think by saying things and having them taken out of context. I think that's very difficult. It's so great. Twitter and social media is so amazing because you really can just say exactly what you meant to say. You can proofread it, and you can put it out there, and people will know this is what this person said. So in some ways, I really appreciate that. But I learned from the women in my family to speak up and out, and consequence well, you take your consequences.
I know you just became an American citizen at the end of not in time to vote for President Trump, I guess, but you'll have another chance in a couple of years. So I was asked the other day, and I don't know what you think about this question, but I was asked about how Me Too is playing out in different countries. I was asked, it was an Israeli television station, they asked me about France and Catherine Deneuve, and was it playing out differently in France and America because French have different sexual I don't know. I don't really know anything about how it's playing out in France, so I kind of punted. But I feel like you really have a little bit of a dual life here and in Los Angeles. You have friends in both places. Your family lives here. Do you see significant differences that are worth mentioning about how this has, I mean, here we've of course had the BBC pay equity scandal. We had people resign from Parliament. Do you see anything interesting about how it's different here and there?
I feel that there has been more instant consequence here in England, in the UK. There really has. I mean, Harvey Weinstein hasn't been prosecuted. The state of New York, kind of brilliantly, is now, there's been a civil suit that the state prosecutor is now bringing against him, against his company, saying that they were complicit in these abuses, and now in the sale of the Weinstein company, money should be paid out to these complaints. But that's the only way they've got them so far. Here, women were roaring about the BBC and talking about it, and it was open, and what was going on in Parliament. And it's not saying that there is any more equity for women here, but I do feel that there is actionable consequence in the UK more than in America. I'm really hoping that changes. I'm really hoping that that's perhaps why we have to speak louder. And I certainly, I was sick of taxation without representation, and living in America for 20 years, because that's where the majority of my work has been, was sickening. I have an American child, and God knows I want to vote in the primaries. I want to work for a political campaign, So that was the reason. But, I think what's happening here is excellent.
I want to ask you a little bit about Hollywood and how actresses, your friends, your colleagues have been responding alongside you. I know you didn't go to the Golden Globes, but I wonder what you thought of the campaign. Did it really make a difference for the women to be in sexy black dresses instead of sexy multicolored dresses?
I don't think that was the point. I think the point was, in the same way that kneeling during the national anthem is a peaceful protest, it was a protest. It was a way that women could show sorority. And whether or not, I had some hilarious fashionista from, here actually, and she was furious that, why should fashion take the hit? Why should we black out? Why should fashion take the hit? It's like, well, why not? Because you know what? On one night where women can gather together and they can show solidarity, what a good way for them to be able to do that. So I feel like it's commendable. I really do. Maybe not in a hugely I think it keeps the conversation going. It keeps it moving forward. It was interesting to see how many, particularly with the whole Time's Up thing, how many men felt super awkward about kind of wearing the pin or what they were meant to say. And it's like, oh, just don't say anything, because right now that could be mistaken for something or other. And I do understand that. And I have so many conversations with men and with women about, here we are, the caretakers. How do we make it easier for men? How do we make it okay for them? And there's part of me that's a bit annoyed by that. But there's part of me that also feels like we have to do that. It must be frightening. It must be weird to go, I don't know if I'm supposed to open the door anymore.
Right.
But as I said to you earlier, my boyfriend's oldest son, Atticus, he opens the door for me and his girlfriend and his mum because he thinks we're old. He does his oh, you got a bad shoulder, I'll get the door for you. There's no codified behavior in it. There's nothing that goes back, in the way that I think there is. I know it sounds it's so benign, opening a door, but if you take it all the way back to kind of women being feeble and unable and incapable, and the idea of men being able to do that, it doesn't have to keep meaning that. We can re-look at the things that we do, the things that we say, and we can give them new meaning. Everything is constantly changing. That's what evolution is. We're allowed to evolve. We're allowed to evolve our behaviors and the way that we speak. men and women having further conversations about what is sexually appropriate and what is okay. It's not a bad thing. Catherine Deneuve thinks it's going to be the death of romance. I think it will probably lead to better sex. Better that you tell someone, do this, and it's okay, and it will be fine, and it'll be fun. And I know we're all English, and I'm too, and it's all just like a bit embarrassing. But the fact of the matter is, it breaks down those walls of that we're not able to talk about those, so that people make assumptions, and that's where you kind of get into trouble.
So your son's only 9, so I assume you're not talking to him about sex yet, but...
Oh, Henry, oh, well, no, yes, kind of.
Are you talking to him about this at all? Does it...
I don't think I've told, my nephew, Percy, is here tonight. He's 12. This is a good Henry story, Per. So he came home from school really grumpy the other day, and I was like, oh, what's that? What happened? And he's like, the girls. He has a really deep voice, I promise you. It annoys him that I do an impression of him, but he really does sound like, he sounds like a comedian in the Poconos. So he's like, girls. And I was like, what happened with the girls? Like, they always put their hands up and they always get called on, and I always raise my hand, and they never call on me. And I was like, that does suck. I was like, what classes are these in? It's like, it's always in math and it's always in science. And I was like, well, no, there's this thing called patriarchy. So I didn't. I said, gosh, that must be really annoying. That's very hard, I know. But here's the thing. And we talked a bit before because he's fascinated. He's always interested in asking me. He loves knowing all the sports I wasn't allowed to play when I was at school. Tell me about the one that was the girl basketball. Yeah, that was netball. Tell me about the one which was like hitting with the bat, but it wasn't cricket. Yeah, that was rounders. And why couldn't you play soccer? Why? I don't know, because only boys played soccer. So he loved all that, so I started to try and frame it around that, saying it was very, very different. Boys got to study car mechanics at my school, and we had to do home economics. But what if I wanted to fix the car and I didn't want to bake a cake? Or he'd be like, what if you want to fix the car and you didn't want to bake a cake? I didn't have a choice. So I said things are changing, and this might be what's called an overcorrection, somewhat, but all I can tell you is I know it's difficult for you. Listen up to what the girls have to say and see if you think it's interesting and if you agree with it, and talk about that if you don't. And I'm also incredibly aware that it is very difficult for boys right now. I think girls are having the moment that they've been denied for so long, and that is difficult. And we have to, the only thing we can do is have free and frank discussions, to commiserate and say, I understand that that is unfair, to try and redress the balance where you can as a parent, to keep talking about the history a little bit, but really talk about the present and more about the future.
We're going to go to the audience in just 1 minute, but one of the other things we have in common is I have kids just 1 year older than Henry. And
except you have twins, and
I
don't know how you did it twice.
And this weekend, we spent some time watching your show, watching Speechless, which they totally loved. They wanted to watch it because they knew I was going to meet you and that we were going to be best friends. And anyway, it was, I had watched a lot of the first season when it was on, and then we were watching the second season. And, that's really an activist show, right? You're playing
masquerading
this
as a
character.
half-hour comedy on network television, yeah.
Right, you're playing this, for those who don't know, Speechless is about a child with cerebral palsy, and Minnie plays the mom, Maya DeMeo, right?
Yeah.
Hard to pronounce. And she is this, it's funny Stephen called me irrepressible, because she is a totally irrepressible character who is gonna get what she wants for her son. She pushes for inclusion in this mainstream school. Yeah. Anyway, it's a really activist show. So I wonder how, it's very funny also and delightful, but was it a conscious choice to do a piece of activism at this stage in your career, or
I love that you think
just
that.
a good script? Or?
I wish I could say yes. Ultimately yes, but she was written as a New Jersey blonde, much younger than me. Well, not much younger, but in her 30s, younger than me, and they didn't really think of me for it. So they'd really seen everybody in town by the time they got to me, and I knew that. And my agent rang me up and said, "We've got this script. She's really difficult. She's kind of a bitch, and I think you'd be great." I was like, man. Okay. So I went and met the guy who wrote it, whose life it is loosely based on. He grew up with a brother who was nonverbal CP, and my son in the show is nonverbal CP. And these women who fight for their children who have disabilities, they are fierce, and they don't care about being polite and stepping on people's toes, and they are advocates. And I understood what it was to really become an advocate from doing this show, and it's...
Did that help you speak out in this moment, do you think?
I think it's definitely made me comfortable really being clear about what I think before I speak about it. Being able to articulate it when you see, I cannot tell you how much injustice there is around the world of disability and children who have disabilities and people who experience that. It's astonishing. And we make light of it in the show, and it resonates with families with special needs who watch it, I think, because it is super irreverent. The kid is just a normal teenager. Right. He's kind of an arse. He's not Stephen Hawking, and he's not cognitively impaired. He's just a bit of a dick. He's he's just a normal teenager. He wants to go out with girls, he wants to sort of steal stuff. He's funny and he's great. And it gave me the chance to be, she's a difficult person. She has to be, but you also love her. And I think the more that we can think about that, about difficult subjects, about difficult women, the better.
Okay, and just one, this is a little weird, but I got this kind of weird email from a reader. His name is Sanjay Kakar, and he's a big fan of yours. He sent in photos, I guess before selfies, but from a music gig back in San Francisco of you and him together. And he says that he believes your TV debut was a 1991 Right Guard deodorant commercial.
He's correct.
He says it's viewable on YouTube, and he wants to know if you'd consider doing a sequel.
That's such a funny question.
You don't have to answer that one. We're going to take some from the audience. So there are microphones, I think, somewhere, and we're going to just, to try to do this efficiently, we'll take 3 at a time and then jump into it. So does anyone have a question? There's the microphone.
If you start, if you build it, they will come.
We have lots of journalists.
There's lots of journalists there. Hello.
Hi, it's Hannah.
Hello.
I was just wondering about whether you think, in terms of repercussions and debate, whether what we would call kind of the left-right split, although now it's kind of amalgamating. Do you think that people kind of, the left has a different response to the right on this? Because we talked about Trump and how he's just kind of, this is kind of completely impervious to this in Westminster and what's going on. And it seems Weinstein obviously was, although he's donated to both, was sort of seen as this, kind of liberal Hollywood kind of darling of the left. And it seems to me that that the left have sort of tried to do more about it, but at the same time, I think there are often some people on the left who, because they're leftists, sort of think that because they're on the right side, they don't really understand. I know, obviously, I'm at The Guardian, and I work with a lot of people, and you're in a room with a lot of liberal left men, and they don't understand. Because, when you said about Matt Damon, they're kind of right on people, and they don't get it. So I just wondered whether either of you actually had thought that the way people's political alignments reflect sort of how they respond, or not. Is
your question, how have the responses been different based on whether the people who are accused are on the left or the right, or is your question how the responses have been different among people on the left and right?
Both, I think politically, both actually, because I think the kind of, especially in the US, I think there's sort of, in terms of, Louis C.K., again, a darling of the left, the left seems to, those people who have fallen have mostly been kind of on the left. And here, Michael Fallon, went, so we've sort of had a different thing. But I'm just wondering whether, and it's America and the UK.
I should have mentioned when I mentioned the Polks that the Washington Post also won a Polk Award for its reporting on Roy Moore. And I think that certainly in the US,
that was the outlier.
There has been quite a lot of discussion about how things have played out differently, particularly among the politicians. The difference between Al Franken resigning, his Democratic colleagues calling on him to resign, and the way that Trump and other people stood by Roy Moore, a Republican.
But the black women of Alabama were the reason that Roy Moore did not get in. That's even a little bit of a myth. Is it?
I mean, well, I think it's more interesting than this.
Okay.
The black women had this massive turnout, and the massive turnout did make a big difference. But the difference but the black women of Alabama also voted for the Democrat last time.
Right.
And the people who changed their votes were the white women of Alabama. So the white women I forget what the numbers are, but there was something like a 17-point differential between how the white women of Alabama voted in the prior Senate election, Republican versus Democrat, versus this time. So many more white women who had voted for a Republican in the prior election voted for a Democrat, whereas basically all the black women had voted for a Democrat both times. They did turn out in larger numbers, so I think it was definitely a big factor. But the change in the white vote is why he lost.
So what I suppose that says is that this is actually a bipartisan issue. You know, it's quite leveling, sexual violence against women and men, against everyone. It is leveling, and the threat of having an alleged paedophile in the Senate, I think, was clearly revolting enough to women who maybe never would have considered voting for a Democrat.
I mean, I think I think with the politicians it's been particularly complex, and I think we saw this in the Trump election in particular, because people, when they're at the voting booth, are thinking about lots of things. You know, is the person going to be good for the economy? Is the person a lech? It's a mix, right? Whereas I think in removing people from whether somebody should lose their job as the host of a morning show maybe isn't as complicated, a mix of, real hardcore issues. But
yeah.
But you're saying here it's played out, did you know anything about how it's played out here, left and right? I don't know that I can.
I don't know that I can speak to that, but you probably could speak to that better.
Yeah, I suppose it was, the repercussions, like you say, Al Franken, I felt that people, sort of the left, sort of, and like on the BBC, sort of pay equality and gap, which isn't the same thing, and everyone complains, but never mind. But then also, I think, again, people who, like the Matt Damon thing was really key, and there's so many sort of men that I know who, because they kind of, vote Labour or Democrat or whatever, and they think of themselves as on the left, don't really realise that their behaviour is ingrained. And I suppose that was, it was both. It was people who kind of considered themselves left-wing or right-wing.
I think it becoming polarised, and I think this is where the media is, it's tricky because it's far more sensational to keep it polarised, to keep it being about, men versus women, or it's a liberal crusade. And it's not. It's all of us, and it is, sexual assault doesn't have a political bent.
Who else? Maybe an easier question? Way there in the back? Yeah, something easy, like the right guard commercial or something.
Hi. First of all, I wanted to thank both of you, but thank Minnie for asking us to consider this from a human point of view and not from a gendered polemic polarity, as I think that's what gets us in a lot of trouble. So having said that, I think we're hypersensitized, and I'm wondering, I heard you talking about being outspoken, which I thought was a really good point, and at the same time, about being outspoken.
Yes.
And I heard you mumbling with each other about the word uppity, and I can't help but admit that when you were, Jodi, when you were introduced as what can only be called the irrepressible Jodi Rudoren, that I also had a kind of frisson of, like, are we still there? So that's not really a question, because I want to be polemical about it, but did you?
Well, I mean, there's like this whole list of adjectives, right, that we think are gendered, and I don't know. It gets very complicated, because we think about this all the time in, creating news coverage and writing stories. We use adjectives all the time. And is this adjective, playing into some stereotype? Is this adjective available? And I think there's a line that you can go over, right? If you sort of start to ban all the words, and then you can't express what somebody is like.
That's what Trump did at the Environmental Protection Agency. You know, you,
That's right. You
so
just
he
can't say
banned all
climate
those words.
change.
You can't say climate change. You know, you can't say iceberg. You can't say. He banned all these words. I wish I'd learned them by rote because it's really funny. We can. I feel like we're still looking at it so with such sort of gender disparity. If we have intersectional feminism, like why can't we have more intersectional humanity? Like why can't we be looking at it from that? Like where do we cross over more than where do we differ? And where can the improvements in our language be and in our actions? Because our words are actionable. So.
Yeah. I was going to say, our gender editor who I hired told me a couple of weeks ago.
You have a gender editor?
Yeah, we just hired her. Yeah. Isn't that exciting? Jessica Bennett. We started
That's
a new thing called the Gender Initiative, and we were...
That's really cool.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
So what does she do?
Well, what I was going to say is that she told me I lead like a man, and I didn't know if that was a compliment or not.
Well, I don't know if that's a compliment or not. It depends on the man. Am I leading like George Clooney or am I leading like Donald Trump? Like, what man? That's what you should have said.
That's a good answer.
What man?
What she does, what we're trying to do is we're trying to make our report more engaging to women around the world, and that's about adding coverage, about amplifying coverage. We started a pop-up newsletter called the Me Too Moment to help people navigate through the coverage of sexual harassment, and we're going to be starting a broader newsletter soon. And so watch, we're going to do lots of cool things.
I don't want to start anything with you now that we've just become such good friends. But
I can handle it.
I was a juror at the Tribeca Film Festival a couple of years ago, and there was this, women in film luncheon, and it really irritated me. The whole, just everything. It was just, why do we have to ghettoize and have a lunch for women in film? Why aren't we just people in film? Why is it so bad that we have to give a lunch for the women? Because they're not part of the big boys game, that they're not part of the real directors. They're part of, or the producers, they're part of this thing. And should we not be removing those stigmas and trying to get us all together as people more than stigmatizing and separating us out? Like, can we not understand each other, like, within our Venn diagram?
Do you think they should get
rid
rid
of
of
friendly Venn diagram?
Should they get rid of Best Actor, Best Actress, and just have one category?
Yeah. I think so. I think so.
But at the Grammys, they don't have gendered categories, and then
yeah, and look what happened to Lorde. She was the only nominated for Best Album of the Year, the only person not allowed to perform, and yet Sting, who wasn't nominated, now, I love Sting, but he was. I didn't really understand that. I didn't understand why she wasn't given her moment when all the other nominees were. But
we've got about 5 minutes, so what do we have? Short. This lady, and then up there in the back.
Hi, thank you so much for speaking out about this issue. My question is, Catherine McKinnon said that the Me Too movement is doing more than, in a sense, law could do, as I understand it. And I think that means that there's a risk that perhaps the momentum that's been generated by this movement could disappear. Are there any kinds of things that you would like to see in law, for example, in the United States, where you've recently become a citizen, that you see here? Or are there other things that you'd like to see in the discussion?
Yeah, that's a
that
great
haven't
question.
happened yet?
Did people hear the question? Should I repeat the question? Yes, everyone heard.
That is such a brilliant question, because I thought about it a lot, but I didn't articulate it as well as you did. I was thinking about if you have a corporate culture, right, that protects Roger Ailes and Bill O'Reilly and Harvey Weinstein, and it's structured to protect the bully and to pay off the complainant. So how about we get rid of that? How about at my kid's school, or any school, hopefully, if there's a bully, your kid's getting bullied, your kid gets protected, but the bully is helped to get some treatment. They're sent away to kind of like retrain, like figure it out. There are mandates around that. It would be really nice to see that people would have an opportunity to like make different choices, whilst also having a place that's not HR. HR at the Weinstein Company, the girl that told the HR about Harvey Weinstein, there was a memo that went straight back to him, and she suffered greatly at the hands of him as a result of that. I feel like there need to be independent bodies that are set up, that companies just willingly want and corporations encourage and have, that are places of safety for people to go and talk or report things that are happening that can then be investigated. The companies put money into that they want to be companies of transparency, that they want to be places that people feel safe to work in and not fearful. I don't know how you get that into law when we're barely keeping Roe versus Wade alive. But I feel like there are enough companies that are beginning to think that way and that are wanting to implement that. And I feel like they'll be the trailblazers and that we need to support them and amplify them when they do that. And the media can help there. And we can talk about exactly that, which is, how does this, because it's one thing for me in Hollywood and Harvey Weinstein, the woman who's working, in the Motel 6 in Kansas or its equivalent in Leicester, where's her voice? Who's listening to her, and what are her safe havens and the places that she can take this to? Which is the only way that this evolves, is if it moves out of the clickbait of pretty actresses who I'm really sorry suffered because they did, and into the realm of women everywhere who feel like they don't have any recourse for sexual harassment and violence. Great question.
This is probably our last question. So.
Hi, Joy Ladico. You said you didn't want this to be about women versus men. I wanted to ask about the women versus women side of things, which is two generations, the older generation and the younger generation, and I always feel like I'm on the cusp of both of them, and that various older women do not want to take on what is happening, or the messages that the younger women are putting out, the most extreme example being Catherine Deneuve. Now, you mentioned this was an insurgency and there were always going to be some outsiders in it. But to my mind, there is actually quite a big division between feminists of one generation and of another, and it's a lack of understanding. How would you try and explain one world to the other?
Jodi? Yeah, I will. I do have some thoughts, but carry on.
No, you start.
Oh, Christ. I read that. I read what Catherine Deneuve said. She said she didn't want men to stop having the freedom to seduce, flirt, and annoy women, which I thought was really funny and kind of great, because it felt from another time. It felt very anachronistic in this current moment. But I also understand that that's her opinion and she feels that way. I think that when young women or young feminists or middle-aged feminists start talking to older feminists about it, it really is, we need to think about the freedoms for ourselves that we want to protect, rather than kind of idiosyncratic behavior between men and women that means different things. It's deeper than that. And maybe it really is about talking and saying, I understand that where you're coming from, you think, Catherine Deneuve, that all the light and sexiness and laughter and flirtation, all that's going to be gone. And I'm saying that the freedom for me to say what is appropriate around what happens around my body and me could actually be a really excellent, different conversation with a man or a woman. That it doesn't need to be frightening and that you're getting shut down, but rather an opening. But I do think we don't do it by belittling and getting cross and thinking it's just old-fashioned, but by talking about it. And I would hope that they would be open to talking to millennials and, millennial adjacents like me.
Wait, you're millennial adjacent?
Oh, I mean, it's out on the next block.
Oh, okay. What do you think's, what's next? What's going to happen next in this movement? Give us a prediction for the future so that we can come back a year from now and see if you were right.
I think more men are going to get involved. I really do. I think more men are going to suddenly go, oh, I don't have to be paralyzed around this. They're going to talk more to their girlfriends and their mums and maybe each other, because God knows that would be a brilliant thing of men talking with women, and is great, but men talking with men about this is probably better, and not in the, oh my God, but rather, how can we walk alongside? Like, how can we actually, I love my girlfriend, I love my mother, I love my sister, I love my cousin, I want to support her in some way, I want to understand this. So
we need some like male consciousness raising
I really do,
groups,
and I think that men speaking with men about this in a way that isn't dismissive and worried, but rather forward-thinking. Bless you, Mum, Serena. The thing I know about men, that the great men in my life have taught me, is that men are brilliant at fixing things and finding solutions. And I feel like if they applied themselves in this way without feeling that they are the problem, they're the key to this. And we cannot do it alone. We cannot. It cannot be women marching forward, protecting their apron pockets. It has to be us walking shoulder to shoulder in the spirit of truth and reconciliation. Like I think it has to be that. I think men need to be empowered in a different way than women do, and I don't think they're mutually exclusive. And I don't think that empowering women and listening to women stops. But I do think that we have to listen and care for men and bring them along with us.
Well, thank you so much for speaking out and being outspoken.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks very much. I really appreciate that.